Hello and welcome to Sex in the News. We are the Siegel Brothers. Got a couple of stories for you tonight. Two we're heading back to Texas for. Judge rules that the citizen enforcement in the Texas abortion law is unconstitutional. Texas schools return an illustrated LGBTQ memoir to the library after an official review. And then our third story will be a research time capsule holds new discoveries in HIV. All right, welcome back, my brother.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this week's Sex in the News.
Indeed.
Oh, do we love the carryings on in Texas?
You know, I think just in the last 6 months, we've talked about Texas more than we have in our entire lives.
But there's a little juice here tonight. There's a little good payback,
yes,
some
actually.
Good news. Well, what we would call good news.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
This first piece, I don't know, does it stand much hope in having much of an effect, considering what's going on in Texas?
I think so. You know, when we look at, again, everybody I'm sure at this point knows, Texas has passed one of the most restrictive abortion laws, effectively banning abortion.
With a brand new twist, the first ever of its kind, where the enforcement of this law is not by the lawmakers or law enforcement, but by the good citizens, not just of Texas, but anywhere. Anybody, anywhere can sue someone who, a woman who's had an abortion or anyone who has assisted in any way, including an Uber driver that took her to a clinic, can be sued for $10,000 minimum.
Right. By anybody.
This was the one we've been talking about for several weeks of shows.
Exactly.
That the Supreme Court basically turned their back on. And now the Supreme Court has heard the most recent Mississippi case, which has been just panting and waiting for its, anxiously awaiting its turn after the Texas move. And that's the one that the Supreme Court will likely take till summer of 22 to decide whether or not we are, in effect, overturning Roe v. Wade and a woman's constitutional right to a safe and accessible abortion.
That's right. And in an unprecedented move, until they decide these cases, they're allowing the bans and the restrictions and what very likely will be declared unconstitutional laws to remain in place. This has never been done before. Whenever there's a constitutional question on a law, they basically put a moratorium on enforcing that law until they can figure that out. This one is saying, no, we think this may be unconstitutional, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go with it until we figure it out.
So this article is about a Texas judge on a couple of weeks ago in early December, that the law prohibiting abortions after 6 weeks, which, as has been noted over and over again, is often, usually before a woman even knows she's pregnant, violates the state's constitution because it allows private citizens to sue abortion providers. Right? They say that the law was designed to avoid normal means of legal challenge because they have been failing for 40, 50 years. Because rather than making state officials responsible for enforcement, as I just said, it gives private individuals anywhere the right to sue doctors and others who provide abortions after 6 weeks. So this judge ruled that unconstitutionality gave legal standing to people who are not injured.
Exactly. So, and again, there's really no law that allows disinterested parties to become an interested party just because they're interested.
And as we reported a couple of weeks ago on Sex in the News, a guy in Oklahoma decided to bring suit just to test it out, just to see that this was actually going to happen.
Right. And it is going to happen more and more and more. And in terms of Texas courts, good luck to you all.
Yeah, a little bit more on this later.
When this starts raining. All right. Let's stay with Texas for one more story.
Some good news for a change.
Yeah, definitely some good news for a change. Something we also did report a couple of weeks ago. There were several books that were removed from the libraries, the school libraries in Texas, because there was a parent's complaint This one parent complained that there was a graphic novel with basically an LGBTQ themed book in the library and felt that it was so inappropriate, it contained sexually explicit content, and basically called it porn. All right? So it was removed from the library.
At the urging of all the way up to the governor,
governor.
the same guy
Right.
responsible for this abortion law.
Governor Governor Abbott. Basically, the book in question was Maya Kababi's Genderqueer, a memoir. And surprisingly, especially for Texas, a 9-member committee consisting of educators, librarians, and parents voted 8-1 to reinstate that book. They looked at it and basically said, while there may be some things in there that some people might find uncomfortable, they basically said by prohibiting it, it was a violation of the civil rights of the students. Right? And found it to be a useful and touching guide, especially for high school students. Right? And they said it has nothing to do with legitimizing LGBT people. It's not about LGBTQ versus heterosexual content, but basically just taking objection to the objection that this was pornographic. Right? And basically said, and I was very, very surprised to hear this from people in Texas. Again, it's just we all have our own biases. But basically made comments to the effect that school should be a place where children are challenged, where they do get different perspectives, where they don't have to agree with everything. Right? I mean, I am shocked that was basically an educational system in the United States, but more so that it is Texas.
But this campaign, the Governor Greg Abbott highlighting a decision in a letter to state education officials urging them to develop, quote, statewide standards to prevent the presence of pornography and other obscene content in Texas public schools, including school libraries. So again, as we discussed this week on Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers, the written word on a page is now being called pornographic, or this is an age-old issue about how to legally define what is obscene, what obscenity means. I never remember the Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, I'm blanking on now because you brought it up.
A famous quote by a Supreme Court justice, long dead, that said, "I can't say exactly what it is, but I know it when I see it."
That's the legal definition of obscenity.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it.
So, of course, one person's art is another person's obscenity. But this, I think, is a victory.
It is.
And,
it's very much a victory. And
screw
Governor
you
Moron is livid over it. Right? Livid.
Good.
Right? And remember, this is the guy that had the unmitigated gall to prevent women from exercising control over their bodies, yet basically his rhetoric around opposing any mask or vaccine mandates is because you can't tell people what they can do with their bodies.
What they can put in or on their bodies. Right. And they want to go climbing up women's uteruses again.
Dante kept a special level of hell for people like you. Right? And for our third story, this I think is really good news, right? Especially in a front that we don't often get a lot of good news from.
It's a very unusual, interesting finding.
It really is. And if this ends up being as good as it sounds, then all of these years of banging our head against the wall and looking at these viral tricks that HIV was doing could now have a much, much simpler solution.
Hopefully. Right? So what's the study
about? So basically this was going back in, there was several men who got HIV in the early 80s, even before they had a name for it, even before they knew what was going on. Since 1984, there's been a whole store of blood and stool samples that have just been locked away.
Sitting in a pathology lab freezer in some hospital basement.
Absolutely, absolutely. And basically what they found was that, well, they were going to throw it all out. I mean, let me just give it a little background. There's like, we have this stuff sitting here in this freezer since the early 1980s. It's expensive to store that stuff. So the current day scientists would say, well, what do we do? It says, you know, might as well just throw it out. It's from the 80s and all that kind of stuff. But one scientist basically said, before we do, might as well test it.
Let's take a look.
We have it, let's take a look. And the resulting study ultimately found that men who had sex with men, right, the MSM term, who contracted HIV had more pro-inflammatory gut microbes than their counterparts who remained HIV negative. They also found that men who progressed to AIDS more quickly had the least favorable gut biome. Now, in the 1980s, we didn't even have the word biome in our
very
lexicon.
21st century thing to be thinking about the health of the billions of bacteria that live in our guts.
Right, and now we are finding evidence that HIV infection and HIV progression may be very closely related to the gut biome.
That is interesting.
Yeah, it really is.
It's gotten, I don't know if a lot of people have heard of this yet. It's kind of like one of those creepy medical things, but they're even doing like poop transplants to cure some immunological disease and things where that inflammatory response because of people's sick gut. They take poop from a healthy person and put it right up into the colon of a sick person. And
they clean it, they process it. You know, it's not like, what was that?
How do you clean poop? Oh, the caterpillar
movie or whatever that was.
No.
Yeah, no, it's not like that at all.
But yeah, it is pretty recent that medicine has learned of the importance. And, you know, another point we've talked about for a long time, the forgotten nervous system.
Yes.
Right? People talk about the central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system, but not the enteric.
The enteric nervous system.
The enteric, that means the brain-gut connection. You know, sometimes you get scared or bad news and you feel like you got diarrhea. That's that kind of gut nervous system that's really important to health. So if this testing the blood and feces of probably likely many long dead AIDS patients from the early 80s can reveal clues to finally developing effective, finally. There are really effective treatments that people with AIDS, with HIV living today can live perfectly normal, healthy lives with undetectable blood levels of the virus. But if this can be a step closer to curing it, to eradicating it, so that someone doesn't need a lifetime on these suppressive drugs,
absolutely,
that would be a
and
huge
how about
advance.
we can look at effective prevention of HIV by making changes in our diet?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that they did find is that the gut microbes of these men in the 80s are different than the gut microbes of men today.
Right.
So let's see how we can use that. And I will say, don't go running out to your health food store or your Walgreens or wherever you go and buy your probiotic supplements, because for all intents and purposes, they're not going to do anything. Right? So, you know, this idea that people have is like, oh, well, they studied this chemical, so I'll go out to the store and buy that chemical, and one has really nothing to do with the other.
But like that little box on the side of the yogurt cup that most people don't know what it means, contains active yogurt cultures, right? Is that the good
well,
stuff?
those are, I mean, it is, but it's still nowhere near enough, right? Again, there are billions of bacteria in the gut, and gut biomes are kind of like fingerprints, right? So in order for you to get good probiotic kinds of treatment, it has to be based on what your biomic population is. And people just, you know, do this generically, and that won't help. But I think this is, again, this is on the verge of what hopefully could be a real breakthrough in how we think about and how we prevent and how we treat HIV.
Very nice.
All right, for our final segment.
Yes. Any regular viewers of Sex in the News know that we often like to end with a little bit of sarcasm and calling out some hypocrisy and a very sarcastic use of the term poetic justice. But tonight we thought maybe for the first time we would do a non-sarcastic, a literal poetic justice and give a real kudos and thumbs up and shout out to California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Indeed, a sincere shout out.
Yeah, who had this stroke of brilliance to call out the Supreme Court and basically use the exact same Texas style law, as we've been talking about this situation in Texas where the state doesn't enforce the laws, but private citizens like this kind of, what do they call it, vigilante justice. Newsom has been talking about introducing legislation making it legal for any citizen in California to sue the manufacturer and distributor of assault weapons. Mm-hmm. And it's genius, right? It's going to force the Supreme Court to say, okay, yes to guns, no to abortion, when it's the same issue.
It's the same constitutional argument. Mm-hmm. Right? So, we will stay tuned to that.
So no Bronx jeer, and just a good, genuine thumbs up to Governor Newsom. Keep up the good work. And congrats on beating that ridiculous recall vote.
Yes, and thank you for standing up and continuing to fight the good fight. And that'll do it for this week's Sex in the News. We are the Siegel Brothers. Please join us every Sunday for a new episode. Thanks for watching.